I think it's worth recalling what's in this briefing document, that the ADB is noting that investors are expressing increasing frustration with India's worrisome urban planning, citing constraints in transport, both air and roads, as we heard in the first session, sanitation, power and water supplies, hotel accommodation and other facilities usually required by investors. But it's these contradictions which are emerging, particularly, though, that one word of worrisome, and the concerns there. And we heard the description this morning of urbanization being an accident of both history and geography here in India. But these are very critical challenges, and they are urgent challenges, simply because of the numbers of people who are aspiring to live in cities because of the difficulties in the rural areas. What I'd like to do is ask the Minister, first of all, to give his perspective, and I would like you to engage. One of the reasons I'm standing here is to ask you as well for your perspectives. What we want to do is define the challenge, define the problem, define the urgency of this issue, and then begin to widen it out into how the solutions can be found, where they're going to be found, how they can be enabled, and how they can be facilitated. So, Minister, a few minutes from you on the challenge, particularly from the rural perspective. You need to press the button.
To my mind, the fundamental challenge is that just as the economy began kissing 10% growth in its GDP, we have sunk on the Human Development Index from the 126th position to the 128th position. The Arjun Sengupta Committee report, which was published about 3 months ago, points out that 836 million Indians, 836 million Indians live on less than 20 rupees a day, and that a huge proportion of them live on less than 9 rupees a day. The processes of economic reform are resulting in India becoming prosperous, but not significantly in Indians becoming prosperous. And the translation of this prosperity, which is disproportionately affecting a relatively small proportion of our population, to a larger number of Indians, is the challenge of economic policy in a democratic polity. For unlike the developed democracies, it is the poor rather than the rich who participate most actively in our democracy at all 3 levels, by which I mean elections to the Lok Sabha, elections to the Vidhan Sabhas, and elections above all to the local governments in India. It's very rarely understood in gatherings like this that we are not only the world's largest, but also the world's most representative democracy. We have close to 250,000 institutions of local self-government in the nation, and to these we have elected as many as 3.2 million elected representatives, of whom 1.2 million are women. It is empowerment, gender empowerment, on a scale that is without parallel in the world and without precedent in history, and yet hardly figures at all in the paradigm within which economic policy is discussed. I understand from the newspapers that the finance minister was here yesterday and deplored the fact that service delivery was not up to par. Well, that's the problem, but the solution has been staring us in the face for the last 20 years, ever since Rajiv Gandhi identified the need for elected self-government to be the source of delivery of goods and public goods and services to the people, instead of the bureaucracy that we've inherited from the British. And yet, empowering them at that level, ensuring that the local self-government units are really effective in both urban and rural India, and moving towards using these for securing entitlements for the people, and thereby replicating among the poor of India the syndrome which is so typical of the last 60 years, which is empowerment leading to entitlements, leading to enrichment for the middle class, is still not within policy perspectives of those concerned with economic policy. And in this process, if we look upon the problem of rural and urban development as not two separate things, but as both connected with empowerment of the people, of the poor, in order to secure entitlements for the people, that is the poor, we will only then be able to secure the enrichment of the poor. Until then, I'm afraid we'll continue to live in an atmosphere of India becoming prosperous and Indians continuing to remain poor. Thank you.
And Minister, do you sense urgency and awareness of the urgency of tackling this problem to help frame this discussion?
Well, the only specific step taken in this direction has been to make me Minister of Panchayati Raj. But I'm not sure that we've done very much more than that.
I'd like to help you define this issue as well. So get a microphone if you can early on rather than later. Anand, Mahindra, your definition of the problem at the moment, before we move on to the solutions, add to the detail and the fabric of this problem.
You know, up to now, a lot of people identified the problem as a problem of neglecting or having neglected India's agricultural area. Irrigation was a problem that we haven't invested in the capital stock of agriculture. The problem, however, that we are discussing today is one of migration. And interestingly, as agricultural productivity improves, as farming efficiency improves, the tendency to migrate, in fact, goes up. So this is a very different scale of problem that I don't think the government has really addressed. There is too much of an equivalence of improving the agricultural sector. I think the focus has to be on further ramping up non-agricultural income. Because if for a moment we have to define the problem and put ourselves in the mind of a potential migrant, what does he or she want? They want diversity of income in rural areas because they're getting more productive, or if they get more productive, then more family members have less to do. So they want non-agricultural sources of income. They want quality of life because today 80% don't have access to proper sanitation. Telephony still hasn't reached the kind of penetration we'd like it to. Most households don't have access to power, all-weather roads, etc. So quality and standard of living is the second thing they want. And the third indisputable fact is that even if they get that, even if they get all of that, they're still going to want an urban life because that's what they see on television. That's what they see as an enrichment of their own lives and their excitement in their lives. So we're going to have to deal with this as a problem. And it may not have been a priority so far of the government, but later on, Nick, as you said, when we come to solutions, I think I will protect my reputation as an incurable optimist because I think good things are happening there as well.
But are you suggesting that really such are the dynamics at the moment that there's nothing that could be created to keep people in the countryside given their aspiration to live in a city?
No, as I said, I am very optimistic that a lot of good things have happened. And a lot of them accidental. As you know, a lot of good things in India happen accidentally. So we've got a lot of accidental urbanization, accidental telephony. And frankly, the road program, I would give credit to the government, has not been accidental at all. There's been great news on the rural road front, which has transformed the non-agricultural income situation there.
Does anyone else does anyone have the microphone at the moment? Someone's got a mobile phone on, but yes, please, help us define the challenge from your perspective. Anyone else at the moment? Anyone else got the microphone? Did a hand go up here? Yes, please.
I think we are seeing in this country, and we'll see in the next 30 years, a huge migration to the urban centers, existing ones and new ones that will have to be created. Exactly because of the kind of agricultural productivity going up, and human beings around the world like to live in urban centers. That's where the word civilization came from. And innovation takes place in those centers. And if that is going to happen, we need one major structural reform. And that structural reform is, as we freed the Indian states from continuous domination by Delhi in every little decision making, by delicensing and making them compete for investment, we need to now create local self-governments of cities, towns, even villages, in order to be able to allow the local people to create the attractions that are necessary for people to migrate to them. In fact, what is clearly unfortunate is that all the local and municipal bodies are not accountable to the citizens that live within their precincts. And this is a most important reform that still needs to be done, which is going to actually create the urban infrastructure that we now require, and also relieve the rural population of the misery that they are presently living in because of agricultural land sealing. And the answer is not, again, to make those 250,000 local self-governments accountable to somebody in Delhi, but to accountable to themselves and the people that live within those areas.
Before we go to Ben and Mohamed, can I ask both the Minister and also Anand on this point, the special economic zones, what role are they playing in this, in changing and modifying the new dynamics?
What role is who playing?
The special SEZs.
The SEZs, I think a very marginal role, and they certainly ensure that their own infrastructure becomes very much better. But in the process of being established, if there isn't adequate consultation with the local people, it merely leads to the disruption of the system. And I do believe that if we are going to have successful SEZs, then they'll either have to be in places which are not very heavily inhabited, or they have to be done with the consent and participation of the local community. What is inescapable, Mr. Gowing, in our country is that the bottom line on everything is democracy. And so if you do not succeed in creating a policy that creates satisfaction within 5 years, the chances are that that policy will get disrupted by a change of government.
What I'm trying to get to is how much are they modifying the dynamics of ruralization and urbanization?
Hardly at all as yet, simply because they are in very small numbers, and where they are most successful, as in Gujarat, they are successful precisely because they do not impinge on the lives of large numbers of people. In Gujarat, we've got SEZs along the longest coastline of any state in India, and much of those SEZs are coming up in marshy lands or in wastelands. But where attempts are made to take over agricultural, rich agricultural land for SEZ purposes, there's a lot of opposition from the local communities.
Anand, what's your view?
I'm going to focus specifically on the question you asked of SEZs and how they impact the whole urbanization process. And to make one full disclosure first, I mean, our group created India's first private sector SEZ, which I think money is a success. It's in Chennai. It was done without controversy. We've just completed land purchase for our second in Jaipur without controversy, because we followed the principle you said, that there has to be a win-win when you do it. So we acquired 3,000 acres without it ever coming into the news. You read my mind in a sense, Nick, by bringing up this question when I referred earlier to accidental urbanization. When this policy was first created and a proliferation of licenses were given for SEZs, there was huge criticism of the government for what they call subscale SEZs. Why are you doing this? Look at China. They've got these giant mega SEZs, Guangdong. Why shouldn't we do that? My point is that if you actually wanted to create a distributed urbanization policy, you couldn't have done it better if you had intended to do it. In the first place, we are not China, and I mentioned this in yesterday's session. We don't have grand plans. We don't do things with a sweep of a pen and everybody's told you will settle in this SEZ or the other. We flourish through diversity and a multiplicity of initiatives. In a similar fashion, I think it's wonderful that you let 1,000 flowers bloom, a number of SEZs, and everybody's looking at SEZs from the economic point of view, the commercial exports. I actually think this is going to be a brilliant accidental distribution of urbanization in India.
Accidental.
Accidental because it was not created as a policy to stem migration. It was not created out of intent and grand vision that this is how we're going to spread centers of urbanization around India, but that de facto is what is going to happen.
Anyone else burning to come in? Please, one over here.
My question to the Honorable Minister. Sir, economic progress is social justice, or distributed justice, that's what you're saying. But can you have social justice without economic progress? One follows the other. You have to have the resources. Your reaction, sir?
Well, obviously you have to have economic growth in order to secure a larger measure of social justice. But it's entirely possible to have economic growth without promoting social justice. And that is the kind of syndrome which I'm warning against. How do you reconcile these two contradictory facts that on the one hand, we're kissing 10% growth, and on the other, instead of rising, we're sinking on the Human Development Index. And that's only because the delivery of public goods and services to the poorer and disadvantaged sections of Indian society, which is the overwhelming majority, is not effective if it's bureaucratically done. It has to be done through participatory methods. And therefore, participatory development, inclusive governance, is the only way to inclusive growth. And I'd like to see this reflected in the 11th five-year plan.
One more question, one more point. Remember, we're talking here about the rural and urban developments, specifically.
I don't have a mic. Can you hear me?
Microphone, please, and then I'm going to go on to Ben.
Would the minister like to tell us whether these 800 million people have become poor because of economic reform or because of the lack of it? Are we not paying for 40 years of lack of reform during a socialist period?
No, I'm afraid you and I have had a long ideological disagreement on this, and I don't think this is the forum where we're going to resolve this. Right. I believe that economic reforms has been possible because of the successes of socialism, but we will continue this dialogue among us for the next 40 years.
Right, let's move that long. Let's move forward. Ben Verveyen, let's move forward to understanding not just the dynamic, but where it can go now.
I think first of all, if you look to migration, the migration is the pursuit of opportunity. So either you bring the opportunity or the people will go and find the opportunity. So that's one thing. And if you look to India in total, what happened over the last 15 years is not just policies in India. It's also the ability that technology has given to people to collaborate over thousands of miles without physical proximity. So the need to be close to someone, to work together by technology development has diminished. Now, if that's possible to do on a global scale, one argues, why couldn't you do it on a national scale? So why do you need to be physically in a city to have the opportunity of a city when it comes to employment, when it comes to education? If you would deploy technology in an easy way that's accessible and that is spreading the capabilities, you would give people choices. I think today the lack of choices is a certainty that urbanization will spin further out of control. So here is policy on one hand, and whether it's ideology or just pure pragmatism, I don't care. The right policy to focus on the right technology, giving people the opportunity to have choices, is the first responsibility, I think, for everybody in this country, whether you are here as a citizen or even, I would argue, as a guest. You have the same interest here.
Have you got any data? Have you seen examples around the world where what you've just said actually is taking place? That people realize they don't physically anymore have to be in a city to enjoy the advantages of a city because of the IT revolution?
Well, what we have seen is many examples where you get remote development taking place because of the opening up of knowledge. So, for example, what we have seen in South Africa is a great example of that, where the opening up of knowledge, sharing of knowledge, by just giving per village one point of access, has created a whole lot of new developments there. Now, it's early days, because we have used this basically only on a global basis so far, and have not put the strengths behind it where we need to. But I think it is pretty clear. The war for talent is such that we have hundreds of millions of capable people that cannot monetize their skills and their talents today because we haven't connected them. And it is in everybody's interest, it's in India's interest and it's of the global interest that we unleash that capability and that talent.
But do you believe, therefore, that that phenomenon you're identifying will be sufficiently powerful to act against the natural temptation and tendency of people to want to go and live in a city?
Yeah, I think people want to live in a city for a reason, not because they don't like their place where they're born. Most people want to stay within 25 kilometers where they're born. That can you see around the world. They love their area, they feel comfortable. Unless you deprive them from the capabilities to have opportunity. So I don't believe that cities per se are the greatest thing on earth. It's because it is a combination of forces that gives that temptation to go there, not because of a law of nature.
What do you believe then has to be done in policy terms to do that, not just to create the pipes and the capacity, but also to persuade people that this is a new opportunity?
I think there are three things that we need to do. First of all, top priority has to be education. And it has to be education that is accessible very close to where you are. Top. Number two is you need to get information. Education without information doesn't give you access to monetize your capability. And the third element, I think, is that you need to prioritize. Actually, I'm more even impressed by India if I see that we have 250,000 elected decisive bodies, 250,000 bodies that have to unite on a policy. That's an achievement, because you have always conflicting policies. We talk here about one of the most complex ways of enticing people to see an opportunity and go for it. That's what you try to do. Not because they want public service with due respect to the minister, because they can see as an individual, for their family and for their health, that they got something. So if we entice them, if we can give them opportunity to develop, I think there is a phenomenal common interest here. And we have the technology, I think, to deliver that for a very acceptable price.
Mohamed Alabbar, you make your money out of building urban phenomena, big buildings, both high and wide. Do you see a massive change taking place which requires a significant modification of the model here in India?
Well, first, I will totally agree that if you were...
Microphone.
I will totally agree, because if you were to look at what you've said, which is so valid, is that nowadays you've got the outsourcing that's taken the world by surprise, and you have organization in California and in Dubai and in South Africa outsourcing to India. And you've got thousands and hundreds of thousands of people are employed in different cities and villages that are employed by these organizations. So, you know, what's wrong with insourcing? What's wrong with people in cities outsourcing to smaller villages, which is, again, with technology, it can be easily done and very successful between California and Hyderabad. I'm sure it can be successful between Delhi and Hyderabad, which is really pretty common sense. But the challenge that we face, of course, and we operate in over 16 countries, is that governments are all saying the same thing. They would like to see development away from cities. And I totally agree as well, is that once a city becomes beyond 5 million density, it's not a very nice place. Now, keep in mind that the challenge that India has is that all the major cities are almost above 7-8 million. And the other challenge is that by probably, 2020, average age of the population in India is 29 years old. So you have a lot of young, they all inspire themselves by technology, by TV, and they are all looking for quality life. Quality life is education, good infrastructure. So they want to live a reasonable way of living. We have a good example where in Saudi Arabia we're building a city for 1.5 million people, and the concept is not buildings. The concept is how to generate enough economic activities in different sectors within this new city, so you are able to create employment, you're able to keep people there, create quality of life, if it's the job, if it's the tree, if it's the clinic, if it's the healthcare, or more importantly, by the way, because the average age I mean, the Middle East and India about the same, say if it's 29 in 10 years' time. Entertainment, which is another element that many of us don't talk about. But this is what also quality of life is all about. So I would stress on one thing, that we need centers of attraction outside cities. And to be very honest with you, call them whatever you want to call them. You want to call them free zones, you want to call them special economic zones, but I really think they need a special regime of rules, regulation, friendly investment environment, so businessmen and investors can put a lot of effort into the smaller villages to be able to create economic activities. And please, let's not forget, India lives in the villages.
Let me pick up on Ben's question. Why do you need to be physically in a city to enjoy the advantages of a city? You deal in bricks and mortar or concrete and steel. You deal in pipes and bandwidth, Ben. Where is the bridge there? Can you see his phenomenon offering you great commercial opportunities, but with a completely different model in a country like India?
I don't understand your question.
Why do you have to physically be in a city to enjoy the advantages of a city? You make your money from developing cities, helping to develop cities. Can you see a bridge between what you do commercially and what Ben is suggesting? In other words, creating the possibility for wealth away from the city, from the bandwidth that a company like BT will produce?
I will totally agree with that, because if I were to look at my kids' age and the younger population in India or in America, business-wise, for me, it makes more sense to start new cities, value-wise. That's one. Number two, I think when it comes to the quality of the infrastructure that can be embodied in these new cities, especially if you compare them with the aging infrastructure in Riyadh or in London or in Delhi, there's no comparison. So you can really create an interesting quality environment and quality workplace and play place for the family, for the individual, for job creation, rather than staying within the city. I'm a true believer in this, and it makes good business sense too.
Minister, your reflection on this kind of debate that's opening up.
I think it's very, very important that we buckle the rural hinterland to its immediate urban environment. And that, tragically, has not happened in India. Typically, the migration from rural India is to metropolitan India. And the growth of our Mufassil towns into larger and larger cities is promoting this process rather than restraining it. Now, why they come in is simply because opportunity, even at the filthy levels that obtain in Selampur, which I hope you will visit rather than the Taj Mahal, will show you where the real India is. And you go in there, and there are people who've come in from East UP or West UP, and they say that life in that utterly filthy cesspool is better than the life that they have left. So clearly in a democratic country, we can't do what some dictatorships have done, which is to physically limit the immigration of people from rural areas. But it makes much more economic sense to provide for rural business hubs in the immediate vicinity of the rural area where the primary produce comes from. And my ministry is certainly engaged in promoting this in cooperation with the corporate sector. I must say the corporate sector is a bit slow to recognize what these opportunities are. And although we are in collaboration with the CII, I would rate the entire exercise as a flop thus far on the part of the CII. We've certainly succeeded in finding some industrialists from on our own who have come into the exercise with us. But ultimately, it is only by a form of economic development which we are trying to promote through what is called district planning, which actually links planning in the rural areas with planning in the urban centers of a given district through the elected district planning committee, that we think might result in a constructive solution to the problem of rural migration. If we can take, as Ben said just now, opportunity to rural India, there's no reason why rural India would wish to come like lemmings into urban India. But so long as almost all opportunity is confined to urban India, I'm afraid you'd be like King Canute if you wanted to stop this wave from coming in. It's coming in. It's coming into Delhi at the rate of 100,000 people per month That's our rate of immigration into Delhi. So please understand the scale of the problem in India and therefore the scale of the solution. If you do not invest massively in non-farm rural employment, not just agriculture and irrigation, in rural India, in other words, unless you urbanize rural India, you will not be able to stop the flow of people from the villages to the metropolitan centers.
Urbanized rural India, define that a little more precisely.
I mean the creation of opportunities for employment and income off the farm. There is a severe limitation in what we can do on the farm because the total number of farm families in India, which is about 14 million, is approximately equal to the number of hectares we have of arable land, which is just under 14 million. So a totally equal distribution of our land would mean 1 hectare per family. And you can see the limitations that this imposes upon increasing agricultural productivity. What I would like to do is cooperative farming, but that would drive the lean up the wall, so I'm not even going to mention it. So the answer, therefore, lies in creating opportunities off the farm. And for that, it is activities like food processing, like biodiesel now in a big way, like the upgradation of handicrafts and handlooms that are produced in rural India. By linking the first 2 or 3 elements of the value chain with those which are further down, by bringing the higher elements of the value chain to where the primary producing is done, that could constitute the answer to A, ending the divide between urban and rural India, and B, actually promoting economic development in rural India in such a way that we have sustainable urban development in the country.
Let's keep exploring this. Anand, what's your view? Urbanizing rural India.
No, I think that is the operative word. The minister himself said it, although he was first talking about the fact that there is no need for the rural people to go like lemmings into cities. But he did say we need to take urbanization into rural India. The good news, as I mentioned, is that the data shows that non-farm income today is more than 50% of rural income. And that's happened in the last 2 or 3 years. It's happened because, I think, of 2 things. Mobile connectivity, which has created different opportunities for people to build small businesses around that. And secondly, rural roads. For a long time, for the last 10 years, I've been saying that irrigation, although it's been focused on largely, the thing that builds rural affluence faster than irrigation, faster than agricultural productivity, is rural roads, because it allows people, A, to be educated, Ben, because you can actually access a decent school, which you couldn't do earlier if the rural road didn't exist. And secondly, because it allows people to travel to markets to create micro businesses. I think one of the best programs, as far as I'm concerned, that the government has done, which is going to help this urbanization, is the Pradhan Mantri. It's a tongue twister. PGMSY, I think, is a nice acronym, but I think 370,000 kilometers of roads are going to be upgraded, and almost equal number of them are being built, new all-weather roads. This is going to revolutionize India just as much as yesterday we heard somebody, I think the minister say, Mr. Kamal Nath said, when people move from 1 meal a day to 2 meals a day, it has a global impact. I think rural roads in India are going to have a major impact. But finally, coming back to your question, Nick, I think, Ben, at the end of the day, the need to be in an urban center, to physically be in a space, maybe not more than 5 to 7 million, but the need to mingle, I think is a visceral human need. And I don't think an iPod is going to satisfy that, or a PDA completely. I think a PDA will bring opportunity. We were talking about this earlier. I think everything you do will help bring opportunity to rural areas, but we will be living in a little bit of an illusion if we think that despite opportunity, despite commercial opportunity and improvements in the quality of life, people will not want to migrate. You can show them A.R. Rahman or Sonu Nigam on an iPod, but they will still want to go to the real concert.
But Ben, when you're talking about opening up of knowledge, prioritizing those 3 areas you identified, would you call that the urbanizing of rural India or any country? Is it urbanizing or is it something else?
So this is a matter of definition. What do we call it?
But this is
urbanizing or not?
important to understand the phenomenon and the potential.
But urbanizing in a way that you get Delhi 100,000 people per month is going to be absolutely intolerable. And I think everybody agrees with that. So we need to have something else. And I agree with you that proximity of people is a good thing, and that you become a better person, not just to look to an iPod, but you have the real thing. Doesn't mean that the highest level of living is to be in an overcrowded city. So urbanization, if you would go to the next definition and say, give opportunity in proximity. So you can reach out to a center of knowledge. You can reach out to a school. You can reach out to a marketplace where you can exchange views. At the same time, you can also keep some of the specific positives about the rural environment. I think there is no escape from two big things that needs to be done. The first one is get access to education. There is no hope whatsoever from an agricultural society to go to the next stage in a condensed period of time, because the problem of India is where the other part of the world had 60 years to make the journey, they need to do it in 6. And that is unfair, but absolutely the reality. So if you have a condensed period of time, there is no substitute for a massive focus on education. And by the way, if there would be a trained workforce in today's environment, we would love to get access to it. So the world, this is not just an issue for India. It's globalization is an India phenomenon. It's happening here. And I think that if we can get access in 2 ways, from the people to knowledge and from the rest of the world to that knowledge base, you get an enormous help to the government to create what they really want. And whether you call it urbanization or deployment of capabilities is an issue. The second thing that I strongly believe is that the pursuit of opportunity means that people need to know that it's getting better. Otherwise, whatever you say, they will go anyway. And the road that you are going to build, Anand, has 2 ways. It gives you access to the market. It also gives you access to the cities.
Mohamed.
Well, I think you can never really stop anybody from moving into a city. That's just impossible to do. I agree, at the end of the day, everybody wants to go to city center in London to watch theater or go to the concert. You can never stop that as well. But the honest truth is that if you were to look today at India, 29% of the population are in cities. Jakarta, in Indonesia, 50% of the population are in the city. China, close to 40% of that. But the great thing about India is that there's so much to learn with what's going on in the world. It is not sustainable business-wise for companies nowadays, for example, to be in the middle of Paris or in the middle of Jakarta or in the middle of London. Everybody's moving out. Quality of life is bad. It's expensive. Accessibility. So therefore, the environment is getting very complicated, and we are talking about 5-6 million people. Of course, you cannot really limit people's freedom, but at the end of the day, that's what will give the people advantage of environment, quality of life, work, and affordability when it comes to the business survival. So it's a great time for India to be where it is today, to see what the world is doing and learn from.
But if there are these inevitable enormous problems facing cities, we see it everywhere around the world, and the massive increase in the size of cities, is there something that could happen? Do you believe, you're not Indian, of course, from here anyway, can you see it happening in a way which changes minds quickly? Rather like hybrid cars, people jump over very quickly the current way of thinking, and they go to something much more dramatic in the same way that Ben said, not 60 years, but 6 years.
Well, Nick, I'm going public this month in India, so I'll become very Indian, where people have to watch us on a quarterly basis, which is...
That's why I held back.
No, the honest truth is that for you to go and do that, I think we as a businessman, we really believe that it's a good business for us to go that route. We are doing business in Bombay, we're doing business in Delhi, but we are in every B and C city almost in India, because we believe it's a good business, and we believe that these cities are going to grow at the same time. I truly believe if the government is very serious about looking after villages, you know, I've seen it in other countries where their special investment regime is deployed to really look after these people. Maybe the regime is good for 5 years, it's going to be good for 6 years, and so forth. And I think, you know, we have to rally for it. We have to discuss it. We have to really almost promote it for us to move forward.
Well, let me move on to the other issue that we were asked to talk about. What plans will ensure the sustainable growth of urban areas? We've talked about the challenges in rural areas. Minister, what do you believe is necessary to ensure the sustainable growth, the balanced growth of urban areas in India? Is it possible?
You know, I'll be encroaching on my fellow Minister of Urban Development's domain if I even attempt to begin to answer that question.
But you're sitting on the platform.
All I can say is, in the Indian context, please do not mix up metropolitanization with urbanization. Most of the new urbanization taking place in India is of villages which Anand and I knew as we were growing up, which are now assuming the aspect of a town, and towns which are now assuming the aspect of a city. And this is a form of urbanization which I think we ought to encourage. That if the boys who learn how to milk a cow in Gorakhpur, in the villages of Gorakhpur, can have the RA milk colony established in Gorakhpur rather than in distant Bombay, why not encourage that kind of economic development? And up to a point that is already happening, but I think it needs to be consciously pushed. And that means giving economic incentives to businessmen to open their establishments in defined non-urbanized areas to make them urbanized, than to encourage them to continue investing in what are already urbanized areas. That's the best way, I think, in which we might get a geographically more equitable spread of urban development and allow the metropolitan areas to grow in a natural way rather than the extraordinarily unnatural and inequitable manner in which they are presently developing. It's a real shocker to go around a city like Delhi now for somebody like me who was brought up here. We didn't have these huge swathes of the most revolting poverty all around us as we do. And yet, most of the upper middle class urban elite of Delhi doesn't even know this. It doesn't impinge on their consciousnesses. So we are developing a mindset in which we are tending to ignore these people. You can't do that so easily in smaller urban India, and therefore I see much greater hope in promoting urbanization in an equitable manner all over the country, bringing in all the rural areas into urban centers that are not too distant from their respective native villages, than following the path of unimpeded metropolitan development, which has been the kind of urbanization that we've experienced over the past 6 decades.
Anand, sustainable growth of urban areas, how to ensure it is sustainable given the enormous pressures?
Let me focus on Mumbai, which I'm familiar with. And we are at a point in Mumbai which is, close to breaking point. The biggest thing we need and which is missing, whether it's in state administrations or in the central government, up to now, has been a sense of urgency. I think you used that phrase earlier. To me, that was I was planning to suggest that has to be the key outcome of a meeting like this. Sense of urgency which has been lacking. Unfortunately, in India, that sense of urgency usually comes out of a crisis, which is external and imposed upon us. And so be it. Maybe if everybody in India here in this room knows about the example of Surat in Gujarat, which was one of the filthiest, most miserably managed cities in the country. And then it actually suffered from a contagion of plague. Yes, the plague, if you remember that, the medieval plague. And today, it is one of the cleanest cities in the country. So it can be done. The metamorphosis can happen. It's unfortunate in India, whether it was our reforms that began in 91 or whether it's Surat, everything happens from an externally imposed crisis. Can we somehow, if artificially, create that sense of urgency? I think the government of India did that with its urban program and created an incentive-based system where they said, we will provide funds for urban renewal, provided you remove the roadblocks to reform. I think Vinesh is sitting here, the Secretary of Industry of Maharashtra, he knows that just last week in Maharashtra, the Urban Land Ceiling Act was repealed, finally after 2 years of trying. And I'm sure that incentive from the government had a great deal to do with it. The same sense of urgency has to apply, and I think is beginning to apply to Ajit Gulabchand's Bandra Worli Sea Link, which has been held up. But I can tell Ajit that in the Mumbai Empowered Committee, finally a sense of urgency is creeping in and saying, look, nobody is gaining by having a dispute which is going to hold up that freeway. So that's one set of things, Nick, urban reforms which are going to remove these blockades. But I want to go back to something which the minister mentioned, and that's empowerment. Ultimately, for a city like Mumbai, the problems are so immense that you cannot solve them unless you break it up into small subunits. And by that I mean the best improvement I've seen in Mumbai is when neighborhoods get into self-government, self-regulation. There are empowered neighborhoods that say, look, we've had enough. We are going to not allow encroachment. We are going to clean up the neighborhood. We are going to create a recyclable sewage disposal, which is going to function and be self-sustainable. To me, that's the real ray of hope. So 2 solutions. On one hand, sense of urgency, remove any kind of old roadblocks to reform. And then second, on a local level, very, very intensively encourage self-neighborhood government and regulation.
And Ben, the role of IT in all of this, that sense of bottom-up empowerment, creating these new ad hoc communities of concern in cities. Do you feel that an organization like yours or the mobile telephony companies are having a significant role in doing what we've just heard from Anand?
So I'm a huge fan of what happened in India over the last 15 years. I'm a great admirer of all the things that brought us to this debate, because 15 years ago you would have a different debate. But there are also 2 realities. The first reality is that this is no longer a unique value proposition. All around the world there's competition. There's competition with your neighbors, there's competition in other parts of the world. So the sense of urgency that Anand was talking about is absolutely crucial. Now, I don't think the problem is caused by a lack of solutions. The problem with solutions is that you have to make choices. And who's going to make what choices for what reason is probably the most important decision you have to take. I think there is a number of issues that you need to deal with, whether you like it or not. First of all, reputation. If you want to get new investments and the rest of it, some of the enormous cities in India have got worldwide a bad reputation from many aspects. Infrastructure, capabilities to deal with some of the size issues. You need to deal with that. And I think that indeed, if you break it down to smaller items that you can manage, it's what companies do around the world. If it's too big, you break it in smaller items, you're going to manage it, and you give empowerment and capabilities. That's what you do. But you need to get on with it. You can't just let it go. And the second thing that I'd like to say to this is, I don't think that rural and urban are 2 different problems. It's one problem. And it's also one solution. It's the solution about the individual talent. Why did the world come to India? The world came to India not for low cost. There are other places in the world that was even lower cost than India. They came to India because of the combination of unique talent, language capability, and cost. And that combination of those 3, if you lose one of those 3, you have a different value proposition. And I think, therefore, you need to take the untapped resources here and bring them to fruition. Otherwise, you may be in a problem with your value proposition as a nation.
We heard from Anand, though, the sense of urgency, and my question was about the empowerment that comes from the cells in the cities, the mobile telephone systems, which are developing fast, this bottom-up feeling.
Yeah, but first of all, don't talk about mobile telephones, talk about mobile devices. Because you get something in your hands you can do, you can get access, you get information, you get transactions. It's so much more than just saying hello to somebody. So you have empowered farmers to go directly to the market. They know what the market will do, and therefore they can better plan their production and all the rest of the stuff. So if you give tools to people and the education how to use the tools, you get empowerment and you get the creation of opportunity. But it's not enough. It's not just to delegate it all to the individual. I think in the policy matter, you need to create a sense of urgency also to bring the environmental infrastructure to those people to go and really take advantage of what you give to them. Telecommunications and mobility and all the developments, it has created that globalization effect in which India plays such an important role, is also true within India. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen.
All right, anyone who'd like to come into, particularly the minister was critical of the CII at one point. If anyone from the CII would like to come in, please, how many?
I might add that I am the only minister in the history of India to have a co-equal position with the CII, and that is what entitles me to be critical of them. I have a co-chair who is an office bearer of the CII.
Anyone from the CII who'd like to take on the minister on one of the things he said earlier about not enough being done? Right, no one. Right, who'd like to, please? Oh, question. Right, question, please. So we're talking about the rural areas and the urban areas, and the need to ensure sustainability of cities and urban areas and metropolitan India.
As our constitution has guaranteed us that there will be local self-governments which are accountable to the citizens, which is what will bring in the speed to carry out what is necessary to be done, because then you cannot avoid the citizen. A mayor finds it difficult to avoid the citizen. It's very easy to do it when you are far away from the city. So we have also passed the 73rd and 74th Amendment to encourage this. We did not put a timeline on it. When does the minister think that this would be now enforced in this country, at least in the states in which his party is in office?
Oh, I'm not particularly optimistic about the states in which my party is in power, because I do find that a lot of non-Congress parties are much more enthusiastic than Congress governments are about this. I think the degree of progress that we have established might be divided into two segments. One, institutionally, Panchayati Raj has become ineradicable and irreversible, irremovable. That is a huge achievement when one compares it to the performance of local government institutions before the Constitution was amended. And I've given you the figures, so I don't need to repeat them. With regard to empowerment, since the same Constitution gives this responsibility to the states, it is inevitable that the performance is extremely uneven. But we do see that it doesn't really depend upon how large a state is or how small it is, how much it's in the plains or in the hills. I would rank Kerala as easily the state that has made the most progress with respect to effective local self-government. Hot on its heels comes Karnataka, but curiously, the third best state, which I think is well positioned to even take over the others, is Sikkim, which has demonstrated great flexibility in moving in this direction. We've also had significant improvement in Haryana. There are signals of considerable improvement in Rajasthan and in Gujarat. So what I do know is that while we are all moving forward, it's going to be uneven. Now, I'm talking only about rural India, because unfortunately, this responsibility has been divided between two ministries. I think we need a ministry of panchayats and nagarpalikas, but that's a separate question. Insofar as rural local self-government is concerned, it is there on a scale which is truly impressive. We've produced a 3-volume, 2,000-page midterm review and appraisal in November last year, which we've tabled in Parliament, and which has been received with thundering silence by our middle class and by our metropolitan newspapers. We are now undertaking an independent evaluation of the same report through the Institute of Rural Management at Anand. We've also commissioned a very big study nationwide on the state of women in our panchayats, not just the state of the panchayats. And impressionistically, for I have traveled to 22 states and union territories and signed memoranda of understanding with the chief ministers or other authorities of these states, we can see that there is a conscious and deliberate attempt to move forward. But it's blocked by the vested interests. And in a democracy, you necessarily have a dialectic. Ultimately, the dialectic will prevail. But I asked Rajiv Gandhi once, when he was thinking of these ideas, how long he thought it would take for us to get Panchayati Raj in the country. And his answer staggered me then. It was 25 years. And when I said, well, why do you think it'll take so long? He said, well, they had one revolution which shook the world in 10 days, and see how long it's lasted. We need Panchayati Raj forever. So let's take everybody with us. And my big ambition is somehow to beat him to 25 years, that we can get there in 22 years, 23 years. And I think we are moving there. I think we are succeeding. Unfortunately, this revolution in rural India is a silent revolution because nobody in urban India and the urban media is willing to give tongue to this major transformation that is actually occurring among a majority of our people. That is why I deplore this middle classism, which thinks that because I'm all right, Jack, sitting in the Taj Palace Hotel, therefore everybody's all right, Jack. They're not. And we need to consciously reach out to that vast number of 836 million Indians who are living on less than 20 rupees a day and who require empowerment to secure their entitlements of education, of technical assistance. We have perhaps the world's most impressive national e-governance policy. And the idea is to link through various forms of modern communication and IT all the villages of India. And we already have done it in Karnataka, where sitting in a studio in Mysore through satellite, the one teacher is able to access every single block in the whole of Karnataka state. They've done it in West Bengal too. We hope to do this on a national scale. At the National Informatics Center, I can show you a map of any village in India, and you'll be able to tell, has it a school? Where is the school? Has it got a minor irrigation project? Where is the minor irrigation project? So you've got data like that through modern technology, and we hope to leverage it in such a way that rural India enters the 21st century through the IT route in a very short period of time. And whether they'll be able to use that depends upon the political decision as to whether we get effective devolution of the 3 Fs, functions, finances, and functionaries.
Minister, of course, you're here to make sure those voices are heard. There's 830 million here in the Taj Palace. So let's underline that. Now, I think you described yourself as a friend of the CII.
Yes. Suresh Kumar from Emirates Bank in Dubai Inc., so to speak. I'm a friend of CII because I was a founder president of the Business Council there, working with the CII. It's a question for the minister. Is this, I mean, with all humility, is there a risk that some of this elitist discussion on rural India, and considering that 70% of the members of parliament are elected from rural India on the plank of improvement, empowerment, and the like, sitting in Delhi and making decisions? I mean, is there a disconnect? Is there, a risk that you take a view of talking about something about which you can do very little, because a lot of the improvement, if at all, can be done at the state level, at the panchayat level, and here you are sitting in Delhi and
it's that disconnect
and working with the CII or not working with the CII.
No, it's that disconnect which is fundamentally responsible for the problem which was posed to you by the finance minister yesterday, that we are giving huge amounts of money for rural development and rural welfare, but not getting the returns on it because our delivery system continues to be bureaucracy-oriented instead of being participatory. And the minute we succeed in making it more participatory, there will be a greater bang for the buck. And it's towards that the 73rd and 74th amendments were oriented. But when you try and get a bigger bang for the buck, there's somebody along the way who's lost his little squib, and he's standing in the way of this happening. His name tends to be the member of the Legislative Assembly. So we have to overcome various resistances in society. And I think that process will take decades. I think the progress that we have made shows that we are going in the right direction, but a little bit of a boost would enable us to get there. And in this, I think the private sector has a critical role to play. The corporate sector has a critical role to play. And instead of asking me to make business models, which I've been asked, if I knew how to make a business model, I'd be rich like you, not poor like us. I don't know how to make rich business models, but I'd love to see CII telling me how we can do this. And we have individual corporates now who are working with us and showing how it can be done. But as an organization, despite the fact that poor Mr. My friend who's my colleague there, Sunil Munjal, has been to every CII forum in this country, from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, he, as one of them, is unable to persuade them to come in larger numbers to partner us in this exercise, which is the one exercise which will completely transform the face of India and actually ensure that Indians grow as prosperous as India is growing.
Is there anyone from the CII who'd like to help break that logjam now? You've got silence against Minister. What can I do? Please, George.
The sense of urgency is absolutely clear in everybody's mind. This is my 11th Indian Economic Summit. For the last 11 years, I've heard about basic sanitation. Sanitation is not something that gets against vested interest. If we had spent $500 million a year in the last 11 years, every village in India would have sanitation based on today's technology. So what is the blockage on something that is so important for human dignity?
I think again
and can I add to that the issue of fresh water, which is raised as one of the
again and again and again it has been proved in India, all the way from Meghalaya, where we have very detailed studies, to Karnataka, where we have detailed practical experience, that the minute this money is actually given into the hands of the local self-government unit, the efficiency of this vastly increases, particularly if the local self-government unit involves the Gram Sabha in the exercise. Now, although they don't have Panchayati Raj in Meghalaya, because there were parts of Meghalaya where they did this in a participatory way, there's enormous success. There's enormous success in Nagaland. There's enormous success in Karnataka. So I think the answer simply lies in saying, instead of sending this money into the hands of bureaucrats who are then asked in their own lethargical fashion to do it, I'm saying this as an ex-bureaucrat, we must give it to the people. And the minute the people's representatives responsible to the local community in the Gram Sabha in rural India are given this empowerment, they'll automatically secure the entitlement which they want and need.
Mohamed Alabbar, when you hear these problems of sanitation, water, infrastructure, how much do the slowness, which George has just identified and reminded us of, how much does that restrain your investments in a country like India, given what the ADB has talked about, this worrisome atmosphere for investors?
Well, the way we do business, maybe our model of doing business is a little different than other companies, where we really go on a large scale, where, you know, if we're talking about 1 million population, or we talk about 100 million square feet, so we actually build our own infrastructure in many places. We build our own sewage treatment plant. We put in the trees, we do the parks, we do the clinics, we do the houses, you know, we do our desalination plants, we do our power plants. So, you know, the model that we carry is that I think it works well with local governments, where we carry that burden away from them and you know, we use advanced technology in that. And I think, you know what, it's good for our business, I think it's good for our customers, and also it's good for the city. So really we avoid these difficulties in many of the cities where we operate.
Please.
Well, India is the largest producer of milk and dairy, and the second largest in fruits and vegetables. We have almost 60% of the produce wasted because we are not able to distribute, get it to reach to places you desire. And we are again today talking of hungry stomachs. We are talking of upliftment. I mean, if we just focus on this one aspect and drive our policies, initiatives would the gaps that exist between the urban, rural, and a whole lot of discussions that we've had, would there be a solution which would probably, we don't have to wait for 20 more years, but we would see results happening, as more quickly than we would expect if we look at a whole lot of other issues. I mean, I'm sure it would empower the poor and also probably involve some of the rural, as we were just talking of building capacities or training people, building skills. I mean, this one sector would probably help us in a lot of ways. And
I guarantee success in much less than 20 years, in a year. One, we have resources in government now to be able to provide these cold chains, cold storages, food processing units, cluster development, NABARD to provide some funds. We've got technical institutions all around the country which are capable of assisting this. What is lacking is coordination at the local level with local responsibility. Because everything then comes under a centrally sponsored scheme which will be run by a ministry in Delhi, and they will have their counterpart bureaucrats in the states, and it may happen or it may not happen, and it doesn't matter because in any case you get promoted to joint secretary. Now, to change the system, it's fundamentally a systemic question. There is no management solution to our problems. There's only a systemic solution. And that systemic solution lies in providing the resources, in every sense of the term, to the people where they live, and to sensitize the corporate sector, which must be deeply involved in any of this, to the need to look beyond their noses, to look beyond the beautiful cities in which they live, and look out towards where the primary producer resides, and somehow make him not a hewer of wood and a drawer of water, but a participant in the business exercise. And the minute that happens, we've seen it within my own ministry and within my own experience, particularly in areas like Jatropha, particularly in areas like making carpets and rugs, particularly in areas like fruit processing, that if you reach out to them, you bring them in, they are very quick to respond, and they understand the market. They're not trying to violate any business principle. They're just saying, make us partners in your exercise. And we're not asking to become partners in the sense of investing capital, because they don't have the capital, but investing other things that are required for the business to succeed.
Ben.
It's interesting to hear the minister being a very great advocate for the free market. That's basically what he says. Free up with bureaucracy. Give the government the task to set a kind of framework and let the people do it. The interesting thing here is that if you do it in one area, it will have benefits in many others. So one plea is for the agriculture sector, but it would have exactly the same impact on other areas. And I think it's not for the business to go out without the opportunity described to them also to have a further step into the development of that particular area. So if I listen carefully what the minister says, it doesn't sound to me as something that is undoable, because you haven't said one time that you don't have the funds. You have said every single time we have the funds. It's just the management of the funds that's the issue. And that in and by itself is a pretty hopeful conclusion of the message that you give to us.
Anyone else want to join the discussion? Or from the CII? Please.
From what I heard here, it seemed that rather than have very, very large cities, it makes more sense to have smaller cities closer to rural areas. And I wanted to know what would be the optimal size of these new cities. The cities have large, nobody mentions the big advantage of cities that they have economies of scale. They're much more energy efficient than rural areas. Yet people don't want to move long distances. So what is our vision of new cities? What would be their size? How would they be distributed all over the country?
Or the other word, metropolitan as well, as opposed to necessarily cities. Last question, the ideal size of a metropolitan area. Anand.
I was hoping you'd ask me last, Nick, because I don't have a ready-made answer for that. But Nadir sits on my board, so I have to be careful how I answer that question because it may be mixed up with my business model for our SEZs. But Nadir, I think there aren't any finite answers, even if you ask the most sophisticated city planners. I remember back in my college days in the US, I studied city planning, and there was this famous woman, Jane Jacobs, no longer alive, but she wrote very interesting treatises that challenged conventional stereotypes. If you come out with a number saying you can't have a city beyond 500,000 because, for whatever reason, if you look at it as a regression model on the strain on utilities, she brought in social aspects, and she found that a certain level of congestion was necessary to make a neighborhood safe. So if you sit down with a pen and just draw out something and say, here's a neighborhood, and incidentally, they did this during urban rehab in New York. They designed these new urban rehabs saying, here's an optimal number of people, and there'll be no strain on the utilities. And then what happened was they turned into concrete jungles, there was no crowd at night, and crime multiplied. So it's a very complex topic. You might come out with an algorithm based on supply of utilities and resources, and then you find from a social level that wasn't optimal. I don't think there's any hard and fast answer, but I'll tell you one thing, India is going to be a great laboratory to find out the answer.
May I attempt an answer, sir? It came to me from Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, so I'll just share it with you. The distance from Dusseldorf to Munich is approximately the same as from Delhi to Gwalior. And in that area in Germany, he pointed out that there were the following cities. There's Dusseldorf, there's Cologne, there's then Bonn, then you have Ludwigshafen and Heidelberg, and then you get Stuttgart, and then you get Munich. All these are world-famous urban agglomerations. And in our area, the distance from Delhi to Gwalior is largely filled with dacoits. There's not very much else there. So that is the kind of urbanization we need here, where we get lots and lots of these towns and cities, which are important industrial centers, rather than just sticking to the pattern of having Mumbai, Chennai, Kolkata, and Delhi. 3 of those were villages before the Brits came. Only one, Delhi, belongs to us. And we're still stuck with them. But now, happily, there has been a significant development of towns like Bangalore, which were very small within our own memory, and which have now grown into important metropolises. And this is true of all over the country. And I think that is the way towards the future. Urbanization, not metropolitanization.
But then you've got to manage it. And we heard this morning, Bangalore International Airport, but 4 hours to get there.
But that's because we need many more Bangalores. Bangalore has grown, Hosur hasn't. And we ought to be able to make the same Bangalore airport serve Mysore as much as Bangalore. If we manage to do that, then these problems will get solved. Otherwise, they'll just persist.
Ben, Mohamed, any view on the ideal size? There's never an ideal size.
I would agree with the Honorable Minister, all his comments. You can't really decide on a size. It depends on a society, it depends on social habits, it depends on landscape that exists in one country. So there is no one size that fits all. It depends. There's no specific size.
So I lose on the knowledge of geography of the minister. That's why he's the minister. But one thing, if you know only 4 cities in a country of the size of India, you've done something completely wrong. And I think there is a fantastic opportunity here. Now, I'm still stuck with one big question that I would like to ask the minister. If the funds are there, if there is almost a unanimous view where we need to go, what is the obstacle?
The obstacle is a series of vested interests that have been created over the past. I think we made the great mistake of not listening to Mahatma Gandhi when we were making our constitution. He wanted our democracy to be based on the village. We decided, no, it will be based in Delhi, and then we'll grow roots downwards. And those roots just didn't take. And therefore, we had to bring in the most important constitutional amendment, the most detailed, the most lengthy, that has ever been done in the last 50 years. and that was in 1992. It was the one that brought in democratic local self-government. We engaged in implementing that. Unfortunately, it took all of 12 years from December 1992 to May 2004 to even create a ministry of local rural self-government. I'm the very first minister of the subject. We still don't have a separate ministry for urban local self-government, so that all the standard methods of handling these problems continue to prevail and continue to not give us results. The Planning Commission calculated 20 years ago that of every rupee set aside for rural development and welfare, 85%, 85 paise, is spent by the bureaucracy on itself, leaving only 15 paise to actually reach the people, and for people like me to put our cotton-picking fingers into it and collect 1 or 2 paise. If you look at it in this term, it seems as if India is one of the least corrupt countries in the world, because we are not able to really access the bulk of the funds. We need a systemic change where these funds do not lie in the hands of the bureaucracy, but actually reach these institutions of local self-government. We have a shell, it's not been filled. The process of filling it is what I'm engaged in, and I think we've had a measure of success, and I do feel optimistic.
Minister, thank you very much. Can I offer you 4 outcomes from this session? Very complex area. First, what the Minister said at the end, the structures are simply not right. Secondly, the challenge of urbanizing rural India, which is surely an enormous challenge. Thirdly, that phrase, why do you need to be physically in a city to enjoy the advantages of a city? And a final takeaway, the accidental modification of the urbanization model through the SEZs as they develop at the moment. And I thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you.
A bit late.
I was in the outside room.
It was going to be too complicated.